Dawn French, that other great writer, she says of Sebastian Faulks' decision to no longer describe women. She says, the minute we start to police people's imaginations, we go down a very nasty old route. I have the right to write anybody or anything I like. This is called writing. It's about my imagination. I'm inventing some characters. I think Dawn's got a point, and I think it's a very dangerous precedent for a writer to sort of say, I'm so scared of the cancel culturists, I'm so scared of being cancelled by woke warriors that I'm no longer going to describe female characters in case I get accused of sexism. He says it's liberating, Sebastian Faulks, but I think it's the beginning of a slippery slope, don't you?
Definitely, but it's not the beginning of the slippery slope. In fact, right, I think that he is somewhere sliding down the middle of that slippery slope, though we don't know how far down it goes. For many, many years now, we've seen the rise of what they call sensitivity readers or authenticity readers. And those are people who professionally read literature to essentially cancel-proof books, to go through and check that, you know, with respect to their own specific identity profile, whether they are from a certain ethnic minority background or certain sexuality, that the themes in the book and the terms used to describe people, the descriptions, for example, of women, are sensitive or authentic. And so actually this is part of a trend towards what I think should be described in a sort of academic jargon as a sort of radical subjectivism, where basically you end up in a situation where the only thing ultimately, if you take it to its extreme, and its ultimate conclusion is the only thing you would be able to do is write autobiographically, and you wouldn't be able to have any imagination at all, which is what Dawn French is alluding to. So I think actually in that context, what Dawn French is saying is quite a stand that she's taking. And the fact that Sebastian Faulks feels that this is liberating for him, I think should worry all of us. No writer should feel liberated by the decision that he has made in this respect, to not describe a particular category of character, because actually he made this decision after that he was challenged apparently in 2018 about a book that he wrote called Paris Echo, not as well known as Birdsong, obviously, because that's a very famous book, and that was about a protagonist called Hannah. And he was challenged by someone who, to quote them, apparently asked him, what makes you think you have the right to write about a woman? And I think that's the point. He's been frightened into this. And the reason why he feels liberated is because he's found a solution to that. And that solution is simply to limit his artistic and imaginative process. That's a very bad thing for literature.
Yeah, he's not liberated by this decision. He is proving that he's intimidated by people who would criticise his creative process. I mean, he's not just any old writer. He's definitely one of our greatest living authors. And for him to say, I'm not going to describe women anymore, I think is a bit of a catastrophe, a literary catastrophe. To say there are areas of the creative process that I am now scared to visit. That is a real victory for the woke warriors, for the cancel culture mob, isn't it?
It is. And Kevin Mayer, another author, wrote a very funny, actually very amusing piece in the Times on this news story. And he was talking about how he has had a very similar experience and also feels frightened to write about women, because he tells this story of how he had written a book that started with a scene of a birth from the perspective of a mother and a baby. And he'd been invited to this Irish literary festival where he'd been put on an all-female panel with an all-female audience, and could already sense that they were going to be very angry with him when he had to read out this chapter that he'd chosen. And he said that since then he's actually abandoned 3 novels because they were about women, and he felt that he just didn't know how to write about them. He said in one of those instances, he actually, after 40,000 words, decided to change the protagonist into a I presume a talking dog, which is just very funny. But he talks about the sort of the fact that he's wrestling with this exact same problem. So this is not just about Sebastian Faulks, who is a very well-known author, but there will be many writers, men writing about women, who feel that they can't do that. And I think that's really sad for literature. And Kevin Mayer made this very good point, which is that what about Tolstoy? What would Tolstoy have sort of got halfway through Anna Karenina and put down his pen and thought, no, I can't write about this. Can't possibly have the right to write about an adulterous woman.
Exactly. So if you look at sort of D.H. Lawrence, for example, I mean, he wrote at great length about what was so attractive about the women in his book, what attracted the male protagonists to the female protagonists, and you can do that the other way around. But I think it's quite an important part of literature that you explain why this female character is attracted to the male character, or the other way round. And for a writer to say, I'm not going to do that anymore because I might get cancelled, is a very sad moment.
It's depriving not just the author but also the reader of an important aspect of the human experience, because we all imagine things, we all look at a certain person and note certain characteristics about them, and describing a character is integral to describing the atmosphere of a plot, to making sense of what's going on within that plot. Sebastian Faulks talks about how in his latest book he doesn't actually describe the female protagonist, but she's desired by two men, and he says that because he doesn't describe her, he says he gets around the problem of, as he puts it in the jargon of the male gaze, he gets around the problem of describing her through the male gaze. I think we need to move away from this, because it is going to destroy so much potential literature, sort of throttling it in its crib, really. And we won't know how much, sort of going back to what Dawn French said, how much imagination that we will be losing if brilliant writers like Sebastian Faulks feels that he's not able to describe women. It's just absurd. There's a sort of universality to good literature that transcends the identity politics that is being foisted on these writers.
Yes, and he says that it's not necessary to describe this female character in his latest book because she's clearly attractive, because she's attracted to two different men, so therefore she must be attractive. Well, that's a bit like saying, well, no wonder Lady Chatterley's lover was attracted to Lady Chatterley, because he was attracted to her, so therefore she must be attractive. You see what I mean? It's like, no, you've got to explain why. What is the allure? I mean, it's not just physical in her case. It's a social thing. It's a class thing. It's love across the divide. All sorts of aspects can make people sexually attractive. And I think it is incumbent upon a good author to explain what they are.
Some of the most beautiful descriptions in literature are of people and places.
Yeah.
And the idea that you wouldn't be able to describe a person's physical features as you imagine them within that story just seems like nonsense. As I say, it's a part of the human experience to recognize the beauty in other people. And it just seems absurd to me that we should be impoverishing, really, is what this is. It's impoverishing literature, and it's impoverishing the experience of the reader who, yes, they can imagine that this woman who is desired by these men is their idea of a beautiful woman, but how is that any different from him just simply describing how he imagines her within the plot? And I just think that it's a real shame that an author of the quality of Sebastian Faulks feels, actually, and it's quite obvious, that he just feels too afraid to be able to express himself as fully as he would like to do. And in the process, I think he's going to make literature that he could have written that for future generations, for the current generation, people will wonder, what did he self-censor out of those books that could have been beautiful? And I think that's very sad. That's the sort of thing that you get in regimes like Iran with the with the sensitivity readers, going through and taking out the things that are offensive, and you'll always wonder what could we have read that was written by these writers that wasn't, because they were too frightened to.
Yeah, you see, I don't want to be too censorious of Sebastian Faulks, because I understand the nature of his fear. He's 68 years old. Does he want any great big fights with the social media lynch mobs? I get it. But I do think not describing characters in books for anything other than literary reasons is an abrogation of the duty of a writer. And I don't know about you, Emma, but when I read a book, I read the author's description of characters and I form a picture in my mind of what I think they look like. It's part of the fun of reading a book, and he's abrogating that duty, I think. So, as I say, I don't want to be too censorious, but I do not think he's fulfilling his role as a proper author when he decides, I will now no longer describe certain characters in my books, in other words, known as females.
It's part of transporting someone elsewhere, isn't it? And Dawn French talks about this. She writes about a mixed race author, and Bernardine Evaristo, who is also a very famous, well-known author, is very much in vogue at the moment, also made the same point that this is part of taking people to another
Bernardino
place.
she said that
it's ridiculous.
she said that but Sebastian Faulks' decision not to describe females was ridiculous, and I think I kind of sympathise with her.
Yeah, and I think as well, as you say, not to be too hard on Sebastian Faulks, because look at him within the context that he's operating. He is in, as you say, he's in his 60s. He's as according to the assessment of the sorts of people who would categorize people's identities, they would say he's an old white male, and you can see why he would do this, because if you just look at, for example, Kate Clanchy, an author who was asked or has agreed to rewrite her memoirs because of descriptions that she made in there of students that she used to work with, including describing one of them as having almond-shaped eyes. And that was criticized for being racist, even though the student that described said that they felt that it was an honor to be described in that way, that they felt that was a nice description of them. Or someone like Sally Rooney, who wrote Normal People in 2018, as Nick Cohen has pointed out, before cancel culture became so much of an inquisition. Those were his words. And she was also recently in a review called out for being racist, for having a character talking about Chinese people, even though that character was one that had been portrayed as being quite despicable and was called out on being so despicable. So he's operating in a context where authors are retrospectively held to account for descriptions that either now or in the past would have simply, and I mean very, very recent past, would simply have been regarded as normal, as a sort of acceptable way of describing someone. So what he's doing by just not describing women at all is he's found a way to avoid people retrospectively picking apart his books and saying that something that he's written about women is problematic and sexist.
And when great authors start predicting that they might get in trouble on social media, and therefore they start self-censoring, I think we're in a little bit of trouble. Emma, always a pleasure to talk. Thank you so much for your time.